Welcome to session 191 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 10th of July. Today we'll be looking at Ezekiel 25 to 27 and Psalm 36. But so far in Ezekiel, we've read through Ezekiel's commissioning, his prophetic acts, and finished the accusations against Judah. The book started 5 years after the first group of Israelites had been exiled to Babylon. Jerusalem was still standing and many Israelites still lived there. Ezekiel received a vision of God on his chariot throne above Babylon. He wasn't limited to Israel. His authority is over all the earth. God charged Ezekiel with speaking to the Israelites still in Jerusalem to repent and change their ways before it was too late. But God also warned Ezekiel that the people would likely not listen to him. After taking a week to process all that he had seen and heard, Ezekiel started acting out prophetic declarations. These include making a miniature model of Jerusalem and acting out sieges against it, laying on his side while eating unclean food, and shaving his beard and hair. After more time passed, God gave Ezekiel a vision of what the people were doing to his temple back in Jerusalem. From the outer gates to right inside the inner temple, the people were worshipping false gods and idols. They had desecrated the space that had been reserved for God. Ezekiel had a vision of the presence of God leaving the temple and entering his throne chariot carried by the four living beings. So God declared judgment over the people, their leaders and their prophets. God used many metaphors to depict Israel: an unfaithful bride, a proud lion now caged, a great vine that was dug up and left in the wilderness. God again laid out all of Israel's sins, and then we got the most graphic of images used so far. Israel was likened to an unfaithful woman, and God invites her other lovers to have their way with her and disfigure her. The language was highly graphic and was intended to be shocking. It was a passage that needed wrestling with before we just import it into our modern day thinking. Then finally, the siege of Jerusalem started. God's wrath was starting to pour out, and Ezekiel's mouth was freed so he can now move from declaring judgment on Israel to judgment on the foreign nations. So let's jump in with today's reading, Ezekiel 25 to 27. We now move into this section on the judgment against the foreign nations. The focus of this section is to point out that 1. God has authority to judge all nations, not just Israel, and 2. God will not overlook the wickedness and idolatry in these foreign nations that he has punished Israel for. First up is Ammon, a nation descended from Abraham's nephew Lot. The Ammonites have raided and warred against Israel throughout their history. Because of their rebellion against Israel, God will take them into captivity, destroy their capital city, and cause foreign nations to raid their land, making sure they never exist as a nation again. Next up is Moab, the other nation descended from Lot. Their crime was mocking Judah, saying they were just like all the other nations. This contradicted God's claim that they were God's chosen people. In return, God would now open up their borders to let their enemies in to claim their land. Then comes Edom. Edom were descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. The relationship between Edom and Israel has always been tense, and the Edomites often sided with Israel's enemies whenever they were at war. God will punish them by attacking them with the sword and leaving their land a desolate wasteland. And then there is Philistia, home of the Philistines, who have consistently been enemies with Israel since the time of the judges. God's punishment for this nation is simply destruction. Ezekiel fits these 4 nations into one chapter, but then takes 3 chapters to prophesy over the next nation, Tyre. Tyre was an ancient city that occupied both an island and a nearby land on the coast of the mainland. It was a prominent and well fought after city. The Egyptians, Assyrians and Babylonians fought to gain control of the city at one point or another. After the destruction of Jerusalem, Tyre saw this as an opportunity to prosper themselves, showing the competitive relationship between these 2 nations. Because of this, God will send great waves to destroy the island city and send armies to kill the inhabitants of the coastal city. God then goes more into detail about how he's going to destroy the coastal city, specifically sending the Babylonians with swords, horsemen, and siege weapons. Their destruction will be so bad that all the other coastal cities will be shaken deeply by it. Their kings and leaders will sit and weep at how easily such a great city was brought to its knees. Surely God will destroy this city and send all of its people to the realm of the dead. God then tells Ezekiel to lament the destruction of Tyre. Ezekiel takes a moment to appreciate the great wealth and prosperity of the city. Its docks were great, with impressive-looking ships built of all kinds of wood. Their sails were rich and extravagant. Their sailors and rowers were men known for their strength. Their helmsmen and captain and shipwrights were all highly skilled people. The city was defended by an army of the best men from all the neighbouring areas. Their trade routes were rich, filled with wealth and luxury. Over 20 nations are mentioned as doing trade with them. Their ships were always filled and heavy with trade, but then it turns. The rowers will take them out to sea where an east wind will destroy them. All the things that they were proud of, their wealth, trade, great ships, and skilled men, will all sink into the sea. There will be great mourning over all that is lost and destroyed. The sea was their source of trade and wealth, but now it will be a source of destruction to them. Where in the past they were celebrated and admired by the other nations, now they will be shunned and hissed at. But that is Ezekiel 25 to 27. Now let's look at Psalm 36. This psalm is attributed to King David and is often placed in the category of lament psalm, but this is loose and tentative. It is based on Psalm 36 verse 11, where the psalmist finally makes a request for protection. This would suggest that they are going through struggles, but that's the extent that this psalm reflects a lament psalm. As we'll see, this psalm is a wisdom psalm blended with a prayer psalm. It speaks of the wisdom of God's order and then invites that order down to earth. Here's a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. We start with verse 1 to 4, the folly of the wicked. Verses 5 to 9, the steadfast love of God. Verse 10, let your steadfast love continue. And then verses 11 to 12, let the wicked fall. The first section looks like a wisdom psalm, teaching on the foolishness of the wicked. They fear God and they have no integrity. They flatter, but they speak deceitfully. They have stopped choosing wisdom and instead have set themselves down a path where they no longer reject evil. Typically, a wisdom psalm would contrast this first section with a section on those who are righteous. But instead of focusing on humans who are righteous, the psalmist compares the wicked with God's righteousness and his steadfast love. God's faithfulness and love are never ending. They are precious, protecting God's people from wicked and sustaining them. God is the source of all life. It's at this point the psalm switches into a prayer psalm. Motivated by the wisdom of God's love, the psalmist asks for more of God's love. May it continue. Then, motivated by the folly of the wicked, the psalmist asks that God deal with them. May the wickedness fail and they lay fallen defeated by God. In this psalm, we see that the foolishness of the wicked comes from their rejection of God's faithfulness and love. God's love is sustaining. We also see how wisdom, in our case theology, isn't meant to be just head knowledge, but it's to lead us to prayer. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.